Uganda.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Smithsonian Gardens webinar series, Let's Talk Gardens. We're bringing you information that will help you learn what gardening is all about, both here in the United States and sometimes with speakers from other countries. We want you to know what the hot topics are, what we should be considering, and what you should be doing in your garden. And as you can see behind me, it's tulip time in the parterre in the Enid A. Haupt garden. The tulips are blooming. It's beautiful. Spring, mercurial spring is in full bloom, I should say. All the magnolias got blasted, but we're looking forward to all the other blossoms that pop up in our gardens in this spring. My name is Cindy Brown. I am the Manager of Education and Collections at Smithsonian Gardens, and we are very pleased that you have joined us. Today, we have a guest that's going to take us back to some of our roots. Wambui is an amazing speaker as well as a designer, and she's going to talk to us about, well, what imprints, what footprints, what garden prints were made by our ancestors as they came to the country. To this country, I should say, not just to the country. And she's going to lead us in a discussion that is going to enlighten us on so many new ideas, actually old ideas that are being reshared. So Wambui, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for sharing your ideas with us. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you say and how these puzzle pieces fit together to be able to create the American gardens. So
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Why don't you introduce yourself? I'm going to disappear. I will be back. Remember, everybody, put your questions in the chat box, and I'll be glad to ask them at the end for as much time as we have left over, because I know this will be a robust presentation. So please, now, introduce yourself. I'll see you at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cynthia. And thank you, Zach, for being in the background. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. So I'm seeing somebody called Nina. So I don't know if I'm supposed to be seeing you, Nina, but thank you. Thank you very much for being here. And like Cynthia said, my name is Wambui. I am a Kenyan, East African designer, landscape designer, and horticulturalist. I live on Staten Island in New York now, and I work here primarily in the Northeast region. But I actually did grow up for some time in Washington, D.C., where my mother was a diplomat. So shout out to anybody who grew up in Shepherd Park and who was very much active at Politics and Prose, because I used to go there all the time. I moved from Shepherd Park to Garrison Street, right by, close to Tenley, between Tenley and Friendship Heights. So Washington, D.C. is very much loved. It is my first home in America. So thank you so much. So I just want to say a little bit about this talk that I'm going to give prior to me actually beginning to speak. And if you cannot see my shared screen, please, drop a comment in the chat. I am an immigrant, like many of your ancestors and many of you are. And in my work, in as much as I design beautiful gardens or want to design beautiful gardens, I've always been concerned about my impact on the land here and what I will leave behind once I am gone, either if I move away or, when I die, if I die here in America. Because I think that as a designer and as somebody who loves gardening, as a horticulturalist, that has to be the primary, the driving force behind my work, my intention for the land that I work on. And so I started to research how immigrants have continued to impact the American terrain, and found myself going way back in time to figure out what was here before any of us ever showed up, and how we have affected this landscape and continue to affect this landscape up until today. And if we are doing good, how we can continue doing that good. And if we are not doing good, what changes we need to make moving forward. I am an ornamental horticulturalist. I create, design the landscapes. Many of you are gardeners who, may grow food, may grow vegetables. Some of you might be ornamental gardeners at home, but really our impact on the land is very much the same. So here we go. So my talk is titled Immigrant Gardens and Their Impact on the American Terrain. And by American, when I use the term American, American to me means all immigrants. All immigrants make up this thing called America. And whatever was there before America is what I call Turtle Island, which is what the Native Americans call Turtle Island. So this is really our impact on Turtle Island. So yeah, I'm American now. I was born in Kenya, but I'm now American. My husband is American. My daughter is American. And being American comes with this great pride of belonging to this huge identity of shared values, of being part of a shared experience, right? So we're all American, we're all very happy. We have a chance at a type of life that many people don't have. And it's a wonderful thing to be an immigrant in America, right? But like I said, before any of us ever showed up here, there was something called Turtle Island. And on that Turtle Island, there were these people who lived there. So in my work, I have always been keen to understand what these people were doing before any of us ever showed up, right? So this is a photograph of a picture depicting the United States on or around 1620. This is what the landscape looked like. This is all the forest, the native forest that was here in the United States of America. All this consists of trees, undergrowth, understory, shrubs. So this is what it looked like. On the eastern part of the United States, you see that it was very, very densely forested. And then out west, up into the Pacific Northwest region, you see the old growth forests of the Pacific Northwest. So this is what America looked like in the 1620s. And who knows what it looked like before the Spaniards ever arrived here in the 1500s, or even the Vikings. People say the Vikings arrived here, in the distant past. So just keep this picture in mind as we move through, because we're going to see two more maps down the line depicting forest cover. So the first thing we need to know about what was going on Turtle Island is that Indigenous people owned and cultivated the land. There has been this notion, and I had the same notion when I was a child learning about America, that Native groups and Native peoples really just were migrant people who just roamed back and forth in the landscapes. But of course, we know now that, and have known that Indigenous people farmed, Indigenous people cultivated land, Indigenous people had a sense of land ownership, and they were very much rooted to the ground on which they lived, right? They grew native species, they grew native tobacco, they grew a lot of native Solanaceae plants, the tomatoes that have gone all over the world and that many people consider a very Italian plant, originated here in North America. Potatoes that Irish people consider to be very much a part of their identity, originated here in the United States of America, in North America. Corn, which many East Africans, many Eastern, Central, and Southern Africans consume as a staple food, in Africa, all the way in Africa, originated here in North America. And of course, all these plants moved all over the world because of Portuguese and Spaniard colonialists who came here, took the seeds, took the fruit, and took it with them throughout the world. And then, of course, it spread. So those plants emigrated out of here and arrived in other countries and other locales and other lands as immigrant plants, right? So Native Americans grew native species, many of which have gone on into the world and have become staples everywhere. They farmed, and like I said before, they had this sense of land ownership as early back as, who knows when. This is just a picture that I added to this slideshow, just so that you could get a sense of how these farms were organized by Native Americans. This is Powhatan Village, and this is a drawing from 1590, 1587. So we see clearly here that this is organized living, right? And I mean, this could very well be a farm today, right? So this is what was going on before the Spaniards even showed up. So the Spaniards arrive pretty much around the 1500s, and they bring with them what I call the first invasive species to the United States of America, what is now the United States of America, then Turtle Island. And this is the water lettuce Pistia stratiotis, which we think was introduced in the ballast of these ships that come from Spain, right? So they need ballast to balance the ships. And of course, ballast then was just dug up from the ground in Spain and brought to the United States of America and, South America. So Pistia, because the soil that went into the ballast in Spain was right from, around the seashore. So clearly the plants that come with these Spanish galleons are water plants, the water lettuce being the first invasive species that arrives with the Spaniards to North America. Shortly after the Spaniards come, here come the European immigrants from Europe. And with them in this picture, we see that they bring with them a lot of their food. Of course, they had to eat during the voyage from Europe to America. So here we see apples, we see, I guess that's cabbage, and onions, So they bring with them their food, right? But they also bring with them another invasive, one of the earliest invasives to North America, and that's the Scots pine, Pinus sylvestris, which is native to Europe and Asia. It is native to Europe and Asia, but then begins to become a prominent feature in the American landscape as early as the 1600s, right? It's used as a windbreak, it's used for erosion control, and we're going to talk about why it is used as an erosion control that early on. And it's also used as a source of herbal medicine, lumber, and bedding, right? So people need trees here, they need to start growing trees in the 1600s because something has already happened. Erosion has already begun to be a problem as early as the 1600s in North America. So more invasive species that immigrants bring with them. Here in New York City, we have the Norway maple, Acer platanoides, and the top left of your screen, which still continues to this day to give horticulturalists and the Parks Department massive headaches here in New York City. We have the common periwinkle snail that comes as an invasive to the United States of America. We have Heterohelix, the English ivy, which is brought here as an ornamental by the earliest colonialists, already becoming a problem. So when you look at these photographs, right next to it, I have a by something date, like by 1756. And what I mean when I write this is that by 1756, Acer platanoides, the Norway maple, was already an invasive species in North America. So the common periwinkle by 1840 is already an invasive snail in North America. Rosa multiflora by 1886 is already invasive in the landscape in North America, meaning it cannot be controlled, right? And Lythrum, the purple loosestrife, by the mid 1600s is already invasive to North America, right? So those immigrants, the European immigrants are here, they're building their homes, they're cutting down trees, they're creating homesteads, they're making Turtle Island, beginning to turn Turtle Island into what is now the United States of America. Here we see them clearing trees, many of them for firewood, many for building new homes, and many being sent back to Europe for European timber needs, for shipbuilding, for their armies, for city building in Europe. And as they are doing this, they are bringing, again, many of their plants that they're growing into, for food, for ornamental purposes, for medicine, right? So this is a really great book called Green Immigrants, The Plants That Transformed America. It's a very old book, but if you can find it on eBay or any thrift store or on Amazon, it's just a nice little book to read, because it really shows you what came here, a lot of the plants that came here with the initial immigrants who moved to America. Now, if any of you have ever seen any of my talks around immigrant gardens or immigrant gardening, you may have seen some of these slides. I always include them in my presentations because, as I was telling Cynthia and Zach before the talk began, this is what I call like a default conversation. This is the conversation that we can build on down the line. It's always important to understand what happened, initially, before we even begin to talk about all these beautiful gardens that immigrant designers like myself are creating here in America. So apologies if you've seen some of these slides before, but it's very necessary for those who haven't, so that they can understand why I do the work that I do. Again, more photographs of some of the plants that were brought here. Yes, we do have native rhododendrons here in the United States of America, but a lot of rhododendrons that are brought here to America are non-native species. So rhododendrons, the English yew, vegetables like rhubarb, Rosa multiflora, and many other rose species, apples, many plants that are brought here that are non-native to the United States of America begin to be completely invasive. And even if they are controlled, they aid in erosion in a way that I'm just about to tell you about. So now, how do we begin to see erosion in the United States? So much so that in the 1600s, the Scots pine is needed for erosion control in America. So remember that ballast that the Spaniards put down on American soil, and with it the common periwinkle. So the other thing that the Spaniards and the other European immigrants bring into America is the earthworms. So the European earthworm clearly was not native to Northern America, and up until the time that the Spaniards arrived in the United States, the northeastern half of the United States of America did not have what we call surface earthworms. So the native forests here, those forests that I showed you in that map, had evolved other ways to get nutrients from the ground. They didn't need earthworms. So all you people who think that earthworms are the next best thing since sliced bread in your garden, a little bit wrong, especially if you live in the northeastern part of the United States of America, because Turtle Island did not have earthworms before the European immigrants arrived here, right? So when you introduce these new earthworms into this ground that has never had surface earthworms before, what does that mean? That means that the earthworms begin to tear up the soil and open it up to allow these invasive species that we've talked about in the previous slides to really get a hold in the ground in American soil. And as they do that, they begin to disrupt the ecology, right? So whatever plant communities grew before in certain regions start to be displaced by these new yews and this English ivy and these Scots pine, and the plant communities that they begin to create. Because remember, when these immigrants are coming in, they're bringing in all sorts of stuff. There's no customs and immigration, on the beaches at the time, making sure that people don't smuggle stuff in their suitcases. Anything and everything is coming in. So earthworms are here and they open up the ground and all this stuff begins to root itself in Turtle Island. The other thing that comes with the immigrants is the feral pigs, which of course are scratching, digging up, creating even, bigger holes, and opening up and aerating the soil and allowing all these plants to come in. And they're also eating all these native species because they need food. So feral pigs are another big problem that arrived, another big invasive that arrived with the Spaniards in 1539. And of course, whether they were released accidentally or if they just ran off the ship, or ran away when somebody was trying to kill them and cook them, we'll never know. But these are two big things with that snail, the common periwinkle, that really begin to change the understory, the American understory. There's another group of immigrants who come in early on, and these are the African immigrants, many of whom come with the Spaniards, with the Dutch, with the English, and then with everybody else who is bringing enslaved people into America. And just like those initial immigrants who bring their own, seed and their own plants and their own food crops, these people bring their own food too. They have to have food on the ships coming here. That food is sourced in Africa. And a lot of that food then becomes a part of the American, food base. So here we have okra. Here we have different types of yams. Here we have rice. Here we have many different types of African peas and many different types of African melons. So all this comes in with these Africans and becomes a part of this American landscape, the beginning changes of the American landscape. So we've talked about how some of these immigrants, the initial European and Spanish are European, the initial European immigrants begin to change the American understory. So let's talk about one case in which African enslaved people completely change a region of the United States of America, and maybe forever, maybe it is changed forever, right? So those of you who've traveled in South Carolina probably know of the South Carolina East Basin, where a lot of rice was grown. The bulk of rice ever grown in the United States of America was grown, right? So this is grown in South Carolina, and it is grown primarily by Senegambian women from the Senegal-Gambia region of West Africa. Now, these are women who've been growing this rice for 2,000 years in West Africa. They know what they're doing. They've been doing this for a very long time. And these women are sourced by European slave traders precisely because they know how to grow rice. And because South Carolina is a region that most resembles the Senegambia region and that is most suitable for growing rice in America. So here come these women, many of whom are put to work in the Gullah Geechee areas of South Carolina. And this is one of the largest wetland ecosystems on the Atlantic coast. So what we see is that enslaved Africans, all of them, well, the majority of them, women and girls, begin to build dikes and dams, and they grow rice on thousands upon thousands upon thousands of acres. And what this leads to is the disappearance of millions of waterfowl, aquatic animals, insects, snakes, etc. Now, I want to make this very clear that this is not an indictment of immigrants, whoever they may have been. Clearly, they came here looking, the initial immigrants came here looking for a better life. The enslaved Africans were enslaved and brought here as forced migrants. So these changes in the landscape are not exactly designed. People don't come here thinking, oh, our intention is to go and destroy Turtle Island. They're coming here, and they're coming here to work the land to meet their basic needs, or they are making people like the enslaved Africans work the land to meet their basic needs. And I say this because, like I said, I call this my default presentation, because it always takes people back to default, and it makes you understand how a landscape can be changed, wittingly or unwittingly. And it helps you as you move forward in your work, think about how it is you now are going to form your mind and what your intention is going to be when you go out into a landscape and want to work a landscape, or when you see people working a landscape, how you can analyze what they're doing in a landscape. So like I said, the rice plantations come into play. And this means the disappearance of millions of waterfowl, aquatic animals, insects, snakes, pollinators. All this disappears, in the course of a very short time. So what this means for the Carolina East Basin and for the United States in general is that over a period of 200 years, the lower 48 states lose an estimated 53% of their original wetlands in 200 years, right? And always just remember that map that I showed you in the very beginning. So 48 states lose an estimated 53% of their original wetlands. What does that mean? What does that mean when you lose that much percentage of a wetland? And meanwhile, you have earthworms, you have feral pigs, you have all kinds of new animals, new plants coming into a landscape in this very short amount of time. What it means is a lot of stress on a landscape, right? So these are some of the animals that disappear from the South Carolina East Basin, but which thankfully, are beginning to have begun to come back and regularize now that clearly slavery has been over for quite a while, right? And remember, all this is going on. All these people are coming into America. All these people are coming through, bringing in plants, building houses, doing this, doing that. And in the background, there's always heavy logging. There's always trees being cut down because, again, you need to build. You need firewood. You need fuel. You need to build ships. You need to build cities. So whilst all this is going on, there's heavy logging going on in the background, right? Which brings us to 1926. And this is what the American forest cover is starting to look like. So you saw that initial map that I showed you. So and that was in the 1600s. So by 1926, this is what the American forest cover looks like. It gets better, so don't despair. So in this one, in this map, each dot represents 25,000 acres. You know how big the United States of America is. So remember how densely populated this area, densely covered this area was right here, and this area was right here. So this is what it looks like in 1926. And that is right around the time we are seeing that big influx of many of your ancestors, who is that second wave, what I call that Ellis Island wave, right? So in the Ellis Island wave, we have the Ruthenians, the Norwegians, the Bavarians, the people from Alsace-Lorraine, the Dutch, the Italians, the Romanians, the Sami Laplanders. So there's so many people coming in to America at this time, right? Guadeloupe, India, Algeria, Albania. I was very shocked when I saw that there was a large contingent of immigrants from India and Algeria. Greece, Romania, the Kazakhs, Denmark. So everybody is coming in 1926. Everybody wants a piece of the action in North America, right? But there's also another crowd that comes in, and this one is the one that comes in from the western part of the United States. So we have a lot of Sikh immigrants who come in and do a lot of farming in California, the Japanese in California, the Chinese immigrants who and wine laborers who are very, very much the bedrock of the Sonoma Wine Valley and the wine industry in California. Of course, the Mexicans, the Mexican farm laborers. So there's also this huge contingent of other immigrants who come in, through San Francisco, through the Pacific Northwest, through the southern part of the United States of America, and many would say that the Mexicans were American because they were already living here, So there's this huge contingent of other groups of people who are doing a lot of work in agricultural work in the western part of the United States. And remember, just like the immigrants on the eastern part of the United States, they're also bringing their foods with them. So they're bringing their seeds, they're bringing their cuttings, they're bringing all the foods that they eat, and whatever ships that sail in from their lands are bringing in their own ballast with their own stuff that who knows, what was coming in at the time. So both sides of the country begin to see these huge changes occurring in the landscape. And of course, the Italian immigrants, many of whom live here on Staten Island, where I live in New York. And right before we started talking, I was telling Cynthia, my husband is an Italian American. He is a second generation, I guess, because he was the first generation born here. Italian, my husband is, and his grandpa, who was a full-blown Sicilian, and his father, who was full-blown Sicilian as well, always gardened all over Staten Island before my husband was born. So this is another group of people, the Italian immigrants. And if any of you know anything or are Italian, of Italian descent, please check out the Italian Garden Project. Cynthia just let me know that the owner of this project is a very dear friend of hers. So this is a really great website that you can look at, because it gives you a wonderful, wonderful history on what Italian gardeners have done, especially in urban areas and in Pittsburgh. And Cynthia just told me that the owner is writing a book. So I'm looking very forward to buying that book and learning more about what Italian immigrants have done to the landscapes here in the United States of America. And by the way, I always call Italian grandmas and grandpas the original hipster gardener in the United States of America. So I know there's a lot of hipsters, especially here in New York, who think they've got urban gardening down and they are like the innovators. But no, you are not the innovators. The real innovators are the grandmas and grandpas, the Italian grandmas and grandpas, because they really know what they're doing and they really laid the foundation for it. So check that out. Check the Italian Garden Project out if you ever have time. But what happens when you have all these immigrants who move into a landscape and are cutting down trees and having babies and getting creating a better life than they had back home? What you have is landfills, right? Because all that trash that they generate has to go somewhere. So this is yet another way that immigrants affect a landscape, right? Because you need land for trash, right? I live on Staten Island. I live where Fresh Kills Landscape once was. Fresh Kills landfill, I'm sorry, was I believe it was the biggest landfill in the United States, in North America, and the second biggest landfill in the world, second only to a landfill in Siberia, back in the USSR days. And no one seems to have ever seen photographs of the Siberian landfill, because the USSR would not allow people to see what the landfill looked like in the USSR. So imagine that here on Staten Island, where I live, there were 2,000 acres of this landfill. That was second only to the one in Siberia. So that is what happens. We begin to see trash upon trash upon trash, landfills, all over the United States of America, because it has to go somewhere, right? And like I said, this is Staten Island, where I live. Thankfully, I live right here, up here, but this was all the landfill right here, right? And remember, this is New York City, because Staten Island is one of the boroughs in New York City. So, but thankfully, this is what Fresh Kills Landscape looks like today, thanks to the Parks Department, the City of New York, and one of the conservancies here. So altered completely now, and looks like this. Today, you could go hiking, you could go sailing, you could go look at, you could go bird viewing. Totally changed, but again, still a toxic landfill underneath. I wouldn't grow basil or tomatoes on this ground, because I have no idea what was dumped in this landfill. And also because the mafia had, the mafia here had a hold on the sanitation department and dumped all kinds of toxic stuff in this area. So this is what we do as immigrants when we don't know better, right? And this is what Fresh Hills looks like today. Very beautiful, calm, soothing. You know, I love to go down there with my family in the summertime. So when you are next here, please visit Staten Island and see what's going on here. So now we move on to the newest wave of immigrants, and that is my group of immigrants, the newest wave, what I call the JFK immigrants, because we all fly in. We fly in through JFK, we fly in through Dulles in Virginia, you know, we fly in through Miami International, you know, we fly in through LAX. So we're like that new group that comes in, you know, opens up our suitcases, you know, gets asked, did we bring seed? Did we not bring seed? If we brought stuff in that's not supposed to be here, it gets tossed out. So this is that new group of immigrants who come in. And where do we come from? So 25% of new immigrants coming into America come in from Mexico, the rest from China, India, the Philippines, El Salvador, right? So those are the big major groups coming in. And then, but we also have refugees coming into the United States of America who aren't classed as quote unquote traditional immigrants. They come from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Myanmar, Ukraine, and I'm sure the Ukraine numbers are going to go way higher now, right? So this is another group of people who come in, the refugees. And then in every city, you have different percentages. So like in New York City, the highest percentage of immigrants comes from the Dominican Republic, and you don't see them on this graph here, right? So in every city, in every locale, there's all kinds of people coming in and different percentages of those people. And as with all immigrants, today we are all looking for a better life. But unlike the immigrants from the first two waves, most of us tend to stay in or around cities. So here you see where most of the immigrants coming in as of 2018 go. Seattle, Los Angeles, New York, the big cities, right? That's where we all go. And of course, what immigrants always want to do when they go to a new place is they want a taste of home. And many of these new immigrants who are coming in come in from, you know, with agricultural or horticultural backgrounds, and they get here and they see a bunch of land laying fallow, and they want to be able to grow what they grew back home, right? Because they want to eat it, but they also want to be able to provide it for their immigrant, you know, family members and friends, right? So here in New York, we have organizations like Grow New York, Grow NYC, which a lot of new immigrants who want to practice agriculture get help from. So here we see Esteban, who works at the Snug Harbor Botanical Garden, where I used to work a couple of years ago here in Staten Island. It's a botanical garden. And he is a part of Grow NYC and has been able to get a piece of ground here on Staten Island where he grows primarily Mexican food crops, right? That he eats and that he sells to Mexican clientele. Here on Staten Island, the large immigrant groups here are Liberian, Ghanaian, Chinese, and various Central American groups. I believe we might only be 5 Kenyans here on Staten Island, and I think I know them all, and one of them is my aunt. But so you have all these different immigrant groups, like I said, in different locales. And what are these immigrants doing? They're growing all kinds of foods that nobody really knows, if I was the head of, the Parks Department in New York City and somebody asked me, well, what plants are Liberians growing on Staten Island? What Liberian native plants are Liberians bringing into Staten Island and growing on Staten Island? I should be able to say, this is what they're growing. This is how those plants affect pollinators. This is how those plants are affecting the landscape. These are the plants we don't want them to grow because they're invasive. And these are the ones they're okay to grow because they're non-invasive, right? So there should be somebody somewhere, I think in every city, who is able to tell you what immigrants are growing and how those plants are impacting the landscapes there, right? So like I said, this is just what's going on here on Staten Island, right? A picture of Snug Harbor, where I used to work and where I go often to visit. So here, you know, some of the plantings, who knows what's in that ground, right? Like I said, immigrants go to city and urban lots. Here in New York City, you see this often, you know, I mean, at least every week. If you live in Manhattan or you know, Harlem, Brooklyn, Queens, this is what you see. I'm sure you see this too down in DC, these urban lots with, you know, immigrants working outside. You know, in other areas of the US, you see this, you know, California, lots of immigrants working in growing in urban gardens. And what are people growing? Like I said, do you know what is being grown down the block from you? Do you know how it is affecting the pollinators down the street from you, right? And then again, there are immigrant farming programs, many of which are in the Midwest. This lady here on the left is actually a Kenyan lady, and she is growing melons and courgettes and all kinds of stuff that we eat in East Africa. And on this side, you have Vietnamese growing, you know, Vietnamese immigrants growing, you know, all kinds of foods that they eat in Vietnam. So farming programs all over the country, immigrants growing all sorts of stuff. But is your, you know, local parks department or government, you know, agricultural government organization able to tell you what immigrants are growing and whether or not those plants are invasive, right? Because this never ends. The immigrant waves never ever end. And like I always say, we don't know what's going to happen 20 years from now. Is there going to be another huge Ellis Island wave? We already know there's a huge Ukrainian wave coming in, you know, many of whom come from agricultural backgrounds, and many of whom may arrive here and want to continue, you know, growing plants. So we don't know what's going to happen 20 years from now, but clearly something is going to happen and people are going to bring foods in with them, right? So like I said, what does this all mean? So remember that there has, just like there were no surface earthworms in the northeastern part of the United States of America, there were native bee species in America, right? So when you bring in all these different plants, you know, I have these conversations sometimes with urban gardeners, hipster gardeners, and they have all their beautiful sunflowers, you know, in their gardens. And they say, well, we have all these pollinators. They say, you know, we have all these pollinators and we're attracting all these bees. Yes, but what kind of bees are you attracting? Are you attracting native bees? Are you planting the types of plants that attract native bees? Or are you planting plants that attract non-native Hymenoptera, which is a bee species, that then come and fight with the native bee species, right? When you have exotic plants, what you do is you attract non-native bees, right? And some of these bees then expand their territory and edge out native bee species, which is what you want. You know, people are all about, many, you know, horticulturalists and landscape designers today are all about using native plants. And that is well and good. But your home gardener, your avid, you know, home, you know, vegetable gardener or ornamental gardener needs to think about what kind of plants they're growing and what kind of bees those plants are what is the word, are encouraging, you know, in the garden. So more unwanted invasives today. If you are a professional horticulturalist, you know this very well. You know all these friends who have appeared with, you know, the plants that are coming in from many parts of the world: the Asian longhorned beetle, emerald ash borer, the hemlock woolly adelgid. I mean, this is a problem all through the Northeast, and I'm sure you have the same problem in Washington, D.C., right? And then don't forget that there are very many nurseries that are owned by immigrants in America. And in those nurseries, you have all kinds of seeds. being brought in from their countries. Again, for locals, for immigrants who are here to grow so that they can have a taste of home, right? I used to buy peonies from this guy in Chinatown in Washington, D.C., but I haven't been up there since the pandemic began, so I hope he's still there. But Jackie Lee has sold me the most beautiful peonies and beautiful bonsais, you know, throughout the years. So, and I know that he has all kinds of stuff in his store. And when I started doing this research for a book that I'm writing, I started asking myself, well, wow, Jackie Lee has this tiny little store in Chinatown filled with all this stuff. And he's been here probably 40 years or more. So what has he introduced to America and where has it gone in America? Because immigrants come, they buy, they plant, they have a child who moves to, you know, from New York to California. The child takes a plant with them or a cutting with them, and then that thing moves to California, you know, another one moves to Florida. So this is how plants move around, just like people, right? So here we are in 2020. I don't have a 2021 map of what the forest cover looks like in the United States of America. So this is above ground woody biomass, so in tons per hectare. So here you see the darkest regions are right here in California. And here, you know, looking much better than we did in 1925, but clearly unlike what the United States looked like, Turtle Island looked like in the 1620s. And who knows what it looked like, you know, in the 1500s when the Spaniards first arrived here. So we're doing much better, but I hope that as you have seen this presentation, you can start to think about what your footprint is where you are. And if you are an immigrant, what are you planting and what are you seeing in your garden as you plant? What kind of pollinator activity are you seeing in your garden while you're planting all your quote unquote exotic plants in your garden? And you know, I always say, I put this slide on here, you know, just in case you are an immigrant. You know, I want you to know this. When you plant, like I like to plant certain melons and Kenyan vegetables in my garden, I always try to incorporate native plants. So when you plant your garden, don't put in the sunflowers that they all say, oh, put in some sunflowers for pollinators, because that's not what you want to do. You want to have native flower patches in your garden, native plants, native to that region where you are, native to Chicago, native to Washington, D.C., native to Florida, if that's where you are, between those plantings, because those are the native flowers that will attract the native bees that you need in this garden, right? So when you plan your garden, if you are planning edging with sunflowers, plan those edges with things like Rudbeckia that is native, you know, and looks very much like a sunflower. I mean, it really is a mini sunflower. It's just native to the United States of America. So think about that. Think about planting native flower patches in urban gardens and green spaces to restore essential pollinators, right? And if you are a professional horticulturalist aligned to some city, park, or, you know, local, agricultural extension program, try and work with immigrants to, you know, introduce native plants into their gardens. Like I said, many of these immigrants come from agricultural backgrounds. They do understand the importance of pollinators. They are willing to learn, and supply them with native seed, you know, native Rudbeckia seed, you know, native seed, native flowering seed, you know, from your early spring ephemerals all the way on down, you know, to your summer flowers, you know. In cities and counties and neighboring neighborhood garden clubs, universities, farm CSAs, you can all provide this seed to immigrants for their gardens. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed that. I kept it easy. I know we have 10 more minutes. I hope we have questions. And if we have time, Cynthia, I can always show you a couple of slides of my work that I
That
have.
would be great. Yes, we have questions. And one of the big ones that I know I'm thinking of, and we've had a couple of questions to go around there. What about and I'll call it damage for lack of a better word, that has been done to our ecosystems because of the earthworms, because of the feral pigs, because of the exotic plants that have been brought in that have pushed out our native plants, or even the exotic honeybee, which has pushed out some of our native bees? Should we try to bring our soils back to what they were? Should we, what should we do? Should we consider resetting our clock, resetting our soils, resetting our plants? What's your opinion of that?
So I always thank you, Cynthia. So I always look at this work in terms of time, and 400 years may sound like a very long time, but really when you think about time in nature's, understanding of time, it's just a blip, So even when, I know I'm walking into dangerous territory here, but even when people...
This isn't your opinion. Don't worry about it. There's so many opinions out there. I just want to hear your opinion.
But when people talk about global warming or how we've changed the landscape and I always, what brings me back to reality is that this is a very short time. We're only talking about a couple of centuries, right? So the reset is learning this information and understanding, oh my God, this is what's happening. And if this continues unchecked, then we may end up in a very catastrophic place. So it's all about now thinking about, at the very least, introducing native species. So I always call it like the main course. So if somebody says, Wambui, come in and design my garden. So the main course for me would be native plants, right? That's the main course. And then the appetizer might be potted annuals, exotic annuals, but they'll be in a pot, So, and then the dessert will be, bigger tropicals, but again, in potted plants. But the main course is the native plants. So if you start to think like that, and if you are, a vegetable farmer and you want, to, you love that look of the what are they, the sunflowers, how about just trying the Rudbeckia? They're perennials. They'll keep coming back over and over and over and over. And the thing about a native plant, once you put, and especially a perennial native plant, once you introduce a couple of native perennials into your garden and just leave them, to do their thing, you start, over time, you start to create this beautiful native plant community, because they'll attract their little friends who come along, and you can't see this in terms of how I'm going to change things in 10 years, because that's not going to happen. It's how you just start and do the right thing and share the information. And if you have children, they learn. If you have your neighbor's children, they learn. And then that is how time takes care of the problem. I hope that answered your question.
I did. And I see us at a very learning period in our culture.
And I think that's what it is. Yes. And if we accept it as that, if we accept it as a reset, like back, like I was saying to you before this, like going back to default and just realizing, oh, wow, okay, this is where I begin. It's like that old adage, you don't plant trees for you plant trees for your grandchildren, So that's how I think of it, you know. And by the way, if anybody disagrees, please put it in the chat.
We're running out of time but I like the fact that this is your opinion. This is what we have to learn. There are so many opinions out there. What are we going to absorb, and what are we going to do? And I think one of your slides really showed what can be done. Those forests are coming back, as we're understanding. So we're losing them in some areas, we're gaining them in others. We're not going to be able to turn back time completely. But
and you know, I know we have 5 minutes, so I'm trying to jump in. I'm looking at questions coming in. One, I mean, if you think it's bad here, look at Scotland. You know what happened to Scotland. And there's a very beautiful video somewhere floating around YouTube on the reforestation of this one little area in Scotland, you know, that has taken, I think, almost 30 years, you know. So it's time. Time is what heals, and it's dedication, you know. You know, I live in New York City, and I always say, if you want to learn about time and how to do things in time, just find a group of retired school teachers, because when they put their mind to making stuff happen and enacting laws, I mean, they will take time, you know, to get it done. So I hope I answered your question.
I do. And we're seeing questions in there too about earthworms. And that's such a great story. So for people, I don't know if you read Amy Stewart's books and Amy's book on, I'm going to get the name wrong. Zach finding Amy Stewart is something like how the earth moves, or how we move the earth. And it's all about worms. It's all about earthworms. And you can really get the full story of the different types of earthworms that are out there, and what's been done. So what do you feel?
Well, what I would say was, please don't, I mean, just don't buy earthworms. Just let your land do what, plant native plants, plant native grasses. I think one of the best things you can, if not the best thing you can do, is plant native grasses, because there's nothing like grass to begin to recalibrate an ecology. That and having a pond, you know, because if you have a pond, an in-ground pond, and plant native grasses, you just begin this wonderful organic way, you know, of healing, because the pond attracts everything that needs to be there to start, you know, clean, and the grasses to start recalibrating and rehealing that landscape.
I agree. I want you to show some positive pictures of how you're telling this story in your designs. Would you share a picture of the garden you designed for the Philadelphia Flower Show last year?
Let me see if I can.
See if you put it. Well, she's talking, and thank you, Zach, for getting the right name of Amy's book, because it is such an interesting thing to think. For many, many, many years before I became a professional gardener, I thought, earthworms, great, but you have to understand who you're inviting, which earthworms, and not just to read something on Google and think that that's the truth. Go back to the primary sources. Go back to the scientists. Go back to the information that has been shared during their research, so that you can see what they've discovered. So many things, so much information out there. Go back, make your own decisions by reading what they have learned.
So did you want me to share?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That'd be great. I'll do this.
I'll do this. This is from a different. So this was a garden that I created, but this one was not necessarily a native plant, but a native plant garden. But can you see this, everybody?
Yep, I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just try and share this real quick. This was from a garden that I did, but I designed this for this is the garden in process. This was a drone shot of the garden in process. But this was a garden that I designed for humans and their pets, because I designed for humans and their pets. and it was a very heavy pollinator garden. Lots of birds came in here, lots of bees, everything was in here. And it was a garden that I designed for humans and their pets as densely as possible. Because I also always believe that if you are gardening, you have to garden for everything that lives in that vicinity. You know, it can't just be like a painting on a wall that you see by yourself. Everything that lives in that vicinity should be able to take a part in that creation and enjoy that creation. People, I really hope that you enjoyed this presentation, and I hope it made you think, because really that's why I do what I do, is so that you can think. And I can see it's 1 o'clock. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Wambui. And yes, I think you encourage thinking. I think you've encouraged diversity and understanding of what's going on, getting back to the true story. So
Judith, I put in my Instagram, so
okay.
So you can catch me there on my website.
That's great. And let her know what your jewelry is too. So, but thank you all for joining us, and thank you again for listening to this wonderful information that we get to share with all of you.
Thank you. And Cynthia, I'm going to hang on for a second.
Okay. I don't think I can do that.
Okay, well, we'll talk after.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Cynthia.